Director of impetuous intimations. Impetuously intimated. But enigmatically dialogued. In order to be written. Is this? So exactly was Daffody just right. Alternatively, aka. My new year is now. Resolved. Here's why, and to what is. To you, I declare, the year 2022 is going to be what I consider as an extremely fun and a purposefully rewarding one. Because that will be tremendously better in comparison than to any manner of this. Also, the time will be remarkably different, more than to any of the years that came before it, and to any after in all of this connection with it. I'm confident as to say is that when compared to this, it will be more riveting, more fair, and a rarity when comparing 2000 to 2010. Except for the year 2009, because that was a fairly awesome year, remotely purported, and is but another story. But that will be way better than 2012, and hands down, without a shadow of a doubt, true about 2014 through the year of 2021. So therefore, I will only take my time, and do more of that. Doen al diste jem fokin she yet riher. And I also will take my time to do less of this. Doen al diste jem fokin she yet ridar. Yo! You who? What is up, my dude? Do you really need me to include a valid explanation of what this means to you? You said, why did that matter so much to me in declaring to my inventiveness as an expression to its emergence and urgent attentiveness? I see and understand what you're saying, but the point you made is but only for you to ask of me, with pretentiousness of false authority, for a reasonably fun time, and twist, for a utility of tentative explanation to all this, but simply as a miss, and just to all that? But why does that matter, is more of the reason I was thinking, and reaching after, and is a more eminently life-changing answer to that question, and a decision I have reluctantly made to stay in this vain tryst, gamed inquisition. But why does it look so deranged, and yet sounds so edgy for me to ponder, is what they wonder. I know, right? I agree with you. Those were my sentiments exactly. What a great, potentially entertaining, but although a useless talent you have there. Please, say it ain't so. Is this really what you believe about me to be true here? It's at least gotten your attention this far. So, I have demonstrated fair use of my selective, but effective communication, influentially marketing it to you. Is it at least up to par? Ha ha ha, he, you're funny. You are such a gaff at all this, it's making me laugh, and got me so mind-blown, and petrified. Yes, faceted speech is easily identified, and facetious quipsters included, we welcome, and what is encouraged, heeded, and repeated as needed. And what is that you say? This is a tinge, too discombobulated for me, and quite honestly, slightly gay, or rather, cringeworthy. And it also sounded a little bit twangy. Ha, okay, whatever, that sounded kinda perturbed, and rude, also rather crude, coming from you, ex-lil miss, Old Town Road dude? Okay, so, just listen here, my dear. Yeah, I know that you think that this is that, and this is what that is, but it is quite different than all this. I thought I told you all that? Man. I don't get what you're saying, you need to be more clear, and is but really too confounding for me, in disseminating this here. Why in the hell should I even be listening to you? It's too exhausting, more than I'm willing to endure. Who do you think you are, anyways, some kinda Gandhi Pa Grundy Mr. Billy Bob Brittany Shakespeare? You also sound kinda immature, angry, jaded, or awkward, and trying to sound so bold, so cool, so sophisticated with wisdom, but all you is, nothing, but a big friggin' dork, and a damn fool, and a useless tool. Is that what you are trying to say that I am? Well, it's possible that it could be. But that's your opinion, so I got you, is me, described to a T, even although it also might potentially be spot on, as to the opposite of what you said about me. So that is reasonable as to why I preface this aforementioned retort, and is the self-defecationary report, to all of this, you apparently thought and assumed, and is to what only, I expected from you, already out, steadily attentive. But also readily at hand, all just for your frivolously instigating, and profane investigation? And, as to thinking about as to what it is to that, of those southern bells ringing despondent comporting, for this damn Yankees, responsive contortions? Oh, okay, let's see. Yes. That's it. You certainly are, scoffed out, and a yoke at best. Is that the joke you are reporting? Could it be that I am phylogenetically, but naturally, involuntarily, though effective, and also effectually? Or is it maybe you're not really all this conventionally introspective? Is that what comes to mind? Tell me, am I right? That doesn't quite sound right, is what most might say to this. So, these are the reasons as to why I say such things, you may be asking? Well, okay, then just stop, lay back, and listen to all of this, because the answer lies within, and it really most clearly comes down to a question, which is often revised, important, and most frequently asked, and is but the fairest of notions ever devised. Do you have the time for me to share all to what this and what that is about? What is it about this, who makes it unfair to that, in which confounds minds mistakenly with alien expression, also adds to a taste of familiarity for reflection? The term this is a clever disguise to that, which makes present intentions and expressions easy excuses for living, but ever so disposes and disrupts future plans. But the word that has an operant zest to it, and is the difference which makes that required for living joyfully and purposefully, but is a rarity, but that's complex, perplexing, and unfortunately vitally essential, and an evanescently elusive necessity. In order to get to the truest of grips, is to express this singularity in question, to this presentation of our individual perceptions. It is because time really is the most important resource that we own. We all hear that, it is, but what actually happens is that we take the path of least resistance, and it is called this. Yes, I'm talking about the word this. This is a word which is striving to become of universal appeal, but also all too hedonistically experienced and real, also accepted, but sadly, also part of the most bittersweet of truths and realities, not so rarely, but ever so profoundly. What makes it all so unfortunate for that, is because it stands alone, implicitly reviled, implacable, and only indicated rarely about, until afterwards, and is mistakenly identified mostly as this, until imminent disaster. What most of us actually do, is this, and rarely think about more of that. The reason why this is night and day, and is but a dangerous term on display, because this rarely turns into useful, good conditions, but into unpredictable ambitions, anxious and disempowered situations, risky, sour, and quite not comparable to that, but quite on the contrary. This is truly insane, because most of us will do this more often than that, but will mistakenly proclaim is that we rose to that path to enlightenment, but unfortunately actually descended into this tired web, wrought with entanglements, lost in the translations, built from emotional self-sabotaged destruction and revelations of solicitation, fearing the physical connection, and not propounding that we one day will not be able to come back safely from the brinks of insane decay, and truly, from a conversant reality that was accessible easily, but took for granted, as this variegated immensity, for duality begins to falter, as this present structure fades, we walk in order to run, and push ourselves to challenge our authorities, priorities, and lead our lives accordingly. But it doesn't matter what I think, I'm not gonna relate this to the exquisitely inspired true wholeness of perfection and the oneness we always tend to abate, and debate, and deprived of any closeness of comparison, to any human interaction, sharing stories, yearnings to care, or any other true feeling of that, because, we and well others, rarely consider, about thinking considerably more considerately, about me, and also we, or to us, but more than about you, or I, and of ourselves. And just to exhibit, think about a place from a friendly perspective of a time randomly inhibited, that's in a part of space that you did, or thought to have, but didn't, or couldn't think to be, in the presence of, what we thought of, as treasured and truest of friends, right in it, implicit to us, but, rather was what this, is, and was, thought as that to none other than, but only of a hitching post, selfishly scratching to one's own self-conscious recessiveness, desperately needing an answered reprieve of it, and a respite to coordinate it, in order for this to take its place, and whisper its concordances. But no matter what the pain was for, or given unto me, I decided to live in the here and now, while intimating impetuous contextual contents, to connect and direct, a practical approach for others to follow, but also summons others, desperately disparate and incapable, and who are just able to journey slightly forward, like it had only made room to hold a rumor, for an addition to gossip. With its questionable suspicion of repudiated acceptance, it is an objectionable obstinacy of approach, which aggravates, and is reticent, but toyed with riddled opportunistic prying to render, and is what you intended, to put to this side of me, as to which, with no element of excitement was taken, to thinking, or doing, but was also, less important to keep in mind, than as to more important matters to you of having a more sensible, comprehensible, and incomparable, masturbation routine. But that's just gross, that I had to reveal it, and awkward almost, by bringing in an affronted ability for you to testify, just as we laugh at ourselves, without reservation, but inside, secretly hiding, and crying with fearful loneliness within, as to how much we cannot control this natural procession of our lives, because we think that we failed to actually control what was so important to us, or to any useful proposition we believed entitled to us, but was struck with disparaging afflictions. To a trained mind that is focused, the follies to this becomes often much easier in overcoming, but unprepared to those that lead with good intentions can often find life to be overwhelming. But the simple trick is to recognize is the codex expectant in order to afford us a sustainable hack to all of this, is which often is overlooked and with its subtlety skewed and displaced right before our eyes. Many will take this and run to the hills, only later to find out is that was actually what contained most of the thrills, and was not this, which was what kept giving us these vainly cheap thrills. If you still have yet to finally notice, the overarching message is that really wasn't what this was, and to not be mistaken anymore, we must surely get down to the core of this. Maybe it was surely what it was, and what was to blame for all of this insanity, even to becoming so lame, it turns purposeful living extremely confusing, and lastly, inane. We tend to see that time, and this life is but only a game, and as if all of this time here was always unlimited, and hoping the same, if that life would be there too, and always will surely remain. But this is what we truly do, and believe me, it is all true, and I'm definitely including me in all this too, because all that I wanted was really not something obscure, but it was actually nothing closer, and certainly not this, but was just that, which was heated, and was what I actually needed from this. The lesson I hope to make clear for us is in despite of all the troubles of what this does, thankfully, Providence is near, and still hopefully accessible, to all of that, when it was genuinely revered. And then when I realized that was what this was actually, was then when that became self-evident to be clearly true, thinking as if this really was that, and what this was surely what was not true, because I really thought it was that of what I knew. Let me take a moment to explain it as simply as I can for you. Because when things came to an unworthy end, it had always came down to this. But inversely, however, is about the carefully crafted decisions. When practiced consistently, often led me to immensely good conclusions, and very fair conditions, arriving neatly packaged together. With all that, it was acquiesced for my betterment. Does that make sense to you, of this statement? Oftentimes though, or maybe it's just me, would be to waste all of this time in the world, without realizing how fortunate that would be. And by doing it this way, was not getting me anywhere fast, not by here, or by a hair, and really not that fair, as to where, and when, but it was always this, right here, and to it, would seem, is then, it finally dawned on me, that this was, what it could, and what would, and always should be. And by asking myself as to why that what was, is really what I actually thought, that I needed to see. I usually did this by displaying a sort of feigned busyness, by pretending to merit usefulness, was when I often thought that I did, was vapidly flaunt all what this does. And when I moved on to what I was then thinking, is that one day I'd be a little closer to this, but in reality, I was sinking, because it actually was this, but an inkling to that, which was in fact, what was really what I wanted from that. What I hardly ever said, was to surely be first and utmost, but it was this, which often, to what was chosen, and by foremost, was broken. As I blindly rushed towards all of this, I kept getting more confused as to what that actually was, but as far as I could see, or so that I thought, was this really, unto which always becomes done, erroneously. But, by then, is when I often came to, was when I least expected it, damage already ensued, which left me, moping about, drowning with guilt, or shame, all regrettably. This was only realized, when the truth came out, it was for me to see, and to reflect, of this, is when that, finally happened, and trust me, it's often was when the reality came knocking, and it was only then, when this useless complaining did nothing, was when I said, I wished I would have done all of that instead, because then, if I did, I wouldn't have done all of this funk that was so dreaded. Well, ain't that something? Because, if I would have known better, I wouldn't have wasted all of my time on all of this nothing. I could have done this much later, and now let's get back to that now. Honestly, we most often say, we do not have the time of day to do that, fill in the blank. But the reality is just that, we have time to do this, and no time to do that. We even have the time to get so piss-poor drunk, scratching our asses, and acting like a useless damn punk, all while moving around awkwardly, and burping continuously, to acting too lasciviously, all the while developing into this persistently defunct proclivity. Then all this moved us unto ruminating, looking constantly unto that as to this. But all but a mirage. By deluding ourselves, it's a feeling that is close, but only lethargically cajoling authority to birth his purpose to God, but unfortunately only showing by storing useless relics, comporting, and vain imitations are practiced, without useful threat, and located, by proxy. But, senseless to that, but all in, on this, makes this will, of everything insane, imparting to festivities, and by congesting weird stuff, with maximum secular readiness, bringing from innocence to the complicity, by guilt, by shouting, and frivolously put to market this outing, we could absorb meaningful dispositions, unto cultures of meaningless impositions, focusing, connections only to be which are broad to consist, having jolly affairs, apart from this, inducing questionable consolatories, and to try performing much better, likely by dancing, while thoughts tune in by flowing. And to that, I can only relatively describe, is a sort of protruding, nonsensible, or of non-sequential arrangements, and also an epically meteoric lapsing of a containment grasp of connection to the terrestrial relations of others, but only to amass a collection of conspiratorial consorting baubles, acutely paranoiac, and hallucinating to conclusions. Add a fair share of brooding to mix, and a little bit of self-aggrandizing contorting, which unfecundly leads lastly to sharding. And although this ultimately leads us to boredom, if we're lucky to have escaped, or maybe acutely exigent with obtuseness, to snuff films extrapolate, is but when we start to get a grip, and well before that seems more meaningful, and becoming more agreeable, it is seen departing, with true drops of wisdoms. We construct our lives with motivations that we exhibit, to connect our actions, our end goals to reach that limit. But based on our human urges, or devious appetites, for our appeals to satisfy, and not necessarily based upon our passions, purposes, greatest ideals, or reactions. While doing this, useless knocking, sometimes by googling new discoveries, binging on that new Netflix series, looking for numbing devices, and vices, or dreaming incessantly on true love, and affairs of contrivances. Whatever art forms there might be, you may, or may not seem to agree with me, but the reality is, for me is, that I'm not going to participate, or reciprocate to any with profound reactions, or transactions, by wasting any more of my time, with just all of this useless farting. What a strange, and weirdly insane thing for you to say, you might ask? Trust me, I've been there, and done that. It is really me, is from you, who's departing? I wore out the damn t-shirt, regarding. We have only tipped the peak of this story, venture on, and you will see, that it's not boring, although be forewarned, it was not written, scribed, or recorded, for everyone fitted to envision, and can act accordingly, to a tempestuously contentious roller coaster derision, that shrieks loudly to a casual reader, confounding, to perplexingly blurred, to thumping traumatically to the fearful, and hemorrhaging migraine emissions that incur, and insurrections toward the inconsolable, contesting. To continue, lest depriving insanity's unencroachable, making one anguished almost, to affliction, and not recommending a prescription, but as a dereliction, to one fainting fortitude, nor prepped fortifiable, by thick-skinned individuals. Or, on the contrary, this is a wild ride, and an admirable, admissible, of immeasurable sensations, and thrilling, titillating with deepness, conducive, debriefed, and unbridled, to what sheer, awesomeness and pleasure, unrelenting, with philosophically to philological, distributions of distinctions, to methodological modalities, majestic, by wonderments of curiosity, or gloriousness tastes for masterpieces, masticated, which are motivational, and provisional, but canonically absorbed, to imperatives very core, and to one whom chases, ostentatious epilogues, and obscene ablations, or in episodic epistemology, to the occulted, cultured, commixed, and consummated, and committed to convictions connected, to hors d'oeuvres that connoisseurs consume, and conflated to enlightened Orientalists, also. To occidentally precedent comparisons, consecrated, stupendous, emblazoned, and are bastions to conceptions, that were ever axiomatically conditioned, nor, indescribably ever inceptioned, created, or contrived. Tediously tapping, to tenseness and tensions, reminiscent, and described as exasperated excitement, held tightly as, inducing, ad nauseam, betrothed, besotted, apostolic, and an adherence to esoteric cultists, implacable to implementation, to admission for applications to acolyte apprenticeship, made for adoration, and adoption, or options apparently, and indolently etched, to adhesions of appreciation, and the way of freedom, embattled, divine prides deprived, come one, come all ye, we all are committed to comprehensible commissions, so, buckle up tight, let's roll out, and ride on, impermeable to convections, indispensable from support, and sensible, but impervious to all painful, and vain banalities of weakness, upheaving the dullest of numbness, incessantly so, the conditions to this is incurring, and incidentally. So, let's bask in this enjoyable reception, because we have only just begun this run that is vectored towards its gainfully purposeful pursuits, and emanating to conclusions, as we had not once ever scratched to the surface of it, so that you could only imagine then, and you would see, the brutal, honest truth to all that acclimated, as an obsessive convention of fruitful appeals, profitable, eventful, for useful proposition, and is much desirable, and is of sophistication, worthy of mass discussion. Have we asked ourselves questions like how is, and then, or to when it began, to which, this bitter blue pill came in, or if, it even already left, and as to why, all this, was voluntarily consumed, and which only did, grieved us immensely, and loomed, ever closer to the brinks of insanity, but this is not worthy right now, to debate it, nor do not try to profane it, because, it's no mystery to me, but to you, it could be, so, I'm not quite sure, if you would like it, or hate it, because it's really hard to describe until when it will all be finished, and take no less of us, and for us to take in, or contain it. Besides, I have probably wrote 6 books on that subject already, just in order for me to try, and help us relate to it. Now that's a story for another time, but this is what we shall focus on now. Onward, to other things, apparently more constitutional, congealed, or real, and clearly defined, but also, definitely more, incontestably refined? And so, before we move on, shall we take on a much more serious note, as to summarize this all-encompassing approach? You may even relate to a more sinister debate, as to which, we uncovered, is that we could not make any more time to kill, but found plenty of this extra time to pass, by watching reruns, series, and sitcoms on Netflix, YouTube, and Hulu, of the likes of Ken and Peele, The Simpsons, or even something as retro as MacGyver 2. And also, let's not try to seal, and don't forget to reveal, is that either we chewed out someone, which was the real, and a most disrespectfully concealed, ordeal, which took all us asunder, and all the while, is we mostly never had ever demonstratively repealed to that matter. Do you remember when a springing, or spouting of derivation began, rising undetectably sprang forth, first, quietly whispered, most likely smoothly, faintly soothingly tactful, playfully appeasing, or lightly enabling, and not wanting confrontation, to pleasing, not wanting to push the envelope, or crossing the unspoken line, acting a little cautiously submissive, and controlling ourselves, to a recognizable sense of affection, affirmative, or an amicable, and populistical approach, keeping a superlative sensibility, while being whimsically likable, to keeping a framed consistency and a steadfastly controlled maintenance of well-being, to the summate heights of superb affability. Do you remember a time when this diabolical and diametrical dirge helped us without caution, tell off, or offend, by simply allowing our manners to slip loosely to digress, and conjure a proclivity to cursing, or by cussing out a part of our family, or fellow associate, and of a friend, or to a stranger, that was vulnerable, or endangered, almost even to a point of extremely hurtful unrest, that we caused, and which felt so dreadful, even enough to the point of calling this duress? Was it someone closest to us, or one we never gave time to, or dared to explain, nor given a chance at a better understanding? And maybe it was someone that we didn't have an attraction to regard in the slightest sense, or to learn to let trust commence. This, most so often, just did not allow any of that, and did not lead us to anywhere, or any closer to anything sensible, but more likely so, apprehensively, to reprehensible, or to any decisively schemed fecundity, nor to any kind of sheer productiveness. Maybe even 80 to 90% of the time, if we do get done doing this stuff, we made the time for. We often suddenly, and magically, try to resist the affliction, and regress to depression, or repress the correction, but, unfortunately however, usually not with conviction, but by condemnation, looming with guilt, depravity, perdition, or contradiction. We then, after all this is said and done, we will tell ourselves, that I really wish that I would have done, or that they should not have wasted mine, or our time, and none on this or none on that, or, yet is that, I, or we, could have done better, or should have, or have seen this coming, and other reclusive lists of excuses, and of retarded remissions. But the reality is, we all have our choices and decisions, but surely put the blame on everything else, arisen. This is insanity, and leads to anguish, and repetitive depravity, all this time wasted by not taking self-responsibility. Please, no more vain discussions. This is simply contrary, and leads imminently to the contradictory, and it's something of nothing, and its only lurid use is the banal consumption of more precious time's ensued reduction. Why is this all too familiar? Well, this is only my humble opinion, so please, correct me if I'm wrong. Or, please ask yourself, if that makes perfect sense. Does what I describe symbolize proof of my insatiable curiosity, or more clues to prove of my profound proclivity to insanity? Should we just end this debate now, and be done? Am I really that gone? Because, I just recently found this out myself. So, I'm also sure, that it's not just me, that see, and rarely do we, ever, take the time, to do, which actually pays off, in the long run, and that what was worth doing, or that we wished could have done much better. That is a much bolder, and more honest question to ask ourselves, and also an even braver, more courageous way for approaching our living, of full meaningful lives, and is well unto that, a much gripping journey to partake. Because what you apparently see is, the treasure and wisdom is captured, and feelings are made positive, much better than what we describe in the earlier part, and is but more than feelings of bliss, but reality is often it consists of practical, and sensible skills learned, ones that can entertain, to teach, share sure laughter, but as mystique, give critique, instruction, and can be took in without much disharmonious interruption, shows civil duty, sophistication of that, which brings us more unity, and shows those, just how much more focused, with much invoked purpose and wisdom, and of what unique, princely material, makes one special, and gives us pride to know, that others actually value what you bring to them, as the time spent also brings to you, and connection tighter, fused with also a true perception that's brighter, and clearer, more motivation, and confident to birth the bravery, and unto courage within us, which ascertains us, an ability to tackle all of that. And when I do take the time to do things, and build layers to spin simultaneously, and more time to handle them, which oftentimes, at first, I didn't have the time for, I then, reminiscently smiled and confidently looked back to all that was gained, I would say to myself, and to others, I'm really glad that I took the time to do that, and that I was grateful that I finally learned how, and this, or, that I got to know many cool things about such, and of, that, or that person, and unto to cognitely capture, the cultural dynamics of people's traditions, rituals, essential to a unique, societal proprietary of origin. Or, even to come what may be, or just what say you, the capacity to do, something that seemed as it would have been very difficult to construe, although, it seemed worthy, in a way, of not just trying, but by actually dominating, be not intellect, bombastically tinkering, but way more visceral, like an imploded Mistral-bled totality. This is the simple, but yet deeply profound quality of this reality. Because, your time, and also my time, and attention, is a very valuable and shared convention. It is enticing to say that what's in these beautiful bags of bones is worthy of inviting to you to what's mentioning, and to all of the memories that's made, and to all of the camaraderie shared, is what makes you, and I, both equally, and congruently qualified, and comparable, and just as uniquely valuable. At least, for respect, or for love, but maybe even for, a worthy, and converging connection. And now is the time, that I vow to commit, and do my best, to boldly address, and as I do, I will specifically describe, in order to wittingly profess to you, is that, I ask myself these prudential questions daily, always congruent to, by copacetic occupation, which to make discipline definitively defined, every time, upon when the proponents of opportunities consists, and also by challenging all deluges that we unequivocally try to desists, and or resists, but also unfortunately, is when the demiurges are always trying, stridently to persist. And, so, once again, I will reiterate, that my new year should imitate, be fair and resolved, as to declare that I will take the time to learn, and to listen, and focus more on my mission and visions, and to what it's all about, and to whom, and what is virtuous. What is of this, is your curiosity amidst, which brings to us, our lasting connection, and is my humble attention, and this makes good, worthy debate, and breaks, all unworthy dissension. And to this, by focusing, we may reveal to that of which, is really that deep, and also to where and why that it was, question into what is, and what it isn't, and to that is to, how much is by putting me in touch with consideration as to what you really had to share. I'm sure it's that what we patiently participate pertinent to what it is, what was, and to much, much, more. To take more time to invest wisely, in people, and financials that are rewarding, and be intentional in doing my best to make an honest living, for once and for all. And so by, reading the books. Or, by listening to new ideas. Or, by capitulating myself, to a difference of opinions, and beliefs, or lasting ideals, so we use these to rationalize logically our differences in precepts, in which bridges the annulus of mystery, to clear understanding. And also to finally to, and really be, truthfully, more open-minded to do those things. And by thinking about these, and writing them all down, really helps me to focus, in order to reflect upon these things that I had wished that I would have found, or should have asked of myself to have done earlier, when I was young, in this life which, I failed to live up to that, until now. I'm gonna absolutely take the time to do that. Because, the intended effects are so beneficial to us, for this, and for us to persist, for our constitution of these parodies of realities. And is but relinquished to this very thing, and are but newly discovered parodies. For, we do not fully know, and to be further more concise, that not even a single day is sufficed, or promised, to even the very best of each, and to every one of us given, and not missed, even if, we were being willing to admit, and able to have, or submit, is to take the time, in order for us to try, but just own up to this, and don't hold back, and just do that. So, I wish, and also I hope, that my New Year's message reaches out to you, and is worthy of your time, thoroughly concise, understood, and of concerning to your minute attention, and that it could be, or also must also have been, at least slightly to contend, or to of an increment that is profoundly insightful within. Because that is paramount to appeal as, gloriously galantuous, and altogether, gratuitously and graciously rightful. Because, when you actually get it, and is cognizant to it, you might even be able to thank me one day eventually for it, and also catch up to your future selves, whether it will be sooner, or later, or more so we hope, indubitably. Yes, it is what it is of this, and amen to all is of that. Wow, what is of this large fleet, not separated, or small, but also truly deserving, and unique, enduring to those who entreat us, to keep us enthralled as they meet us. If your ventured curiosity is what led you to this summit, and this course of study brings to you much happiness in which that is for whichever it adheres to, we will not surely to plummet. You have filled me with great joy, and unrivaled contentment, that you really did took the time, to journey all the way this far to here, and not lamentate defeat, nor gave in to decrying disaster. This was very much worth the price of admission, to excitedly express this commission, and this is what was so, and probably well intended to be, just because it makes useful for good fortune, to share this with you, and was, and still is, very much delightful for me. Now, knowing all this, makes me thoroughly, and joyfully certain, nothing was missed, of the very thought that I produced that is what I really wanted this to be, which has really motivated me, to make present, and, also take time for you, to a certain degree. And to this I decree, what was the most inexplicable reason these purpose-thick romantic condolences, were the reason that I invited every curiosity that detains what is within you, and is, and for all of your thoughts about this. And for yours truly, although, I must admit, I have the littlest of patience, and possibly have the grips to confessing to have, or have not, the slightest of recourse, or not many interests other to more things, as such this, because it will waste much more than my time, which is as much of a precious resource, I'm not willing to delist at this time. So, this is all depending upon the nature of your questions, tasks, or even, of your comments, nomenclature, or commitments to actions, and, for what is it to become of all this, for whom, may I ask? So, please read even further. I can only allude to say this, as to what comes shortly ahead in this section, is sure to cause some of you contentions, but is really simply as described, that I battle alone, to hopefully not dread, that this would be labeled as perplexing, and or dynamically foreboding, with instructions to be read, but not owning. And, please bear this in mind, these impetuous wisdoms, which are enigmatically dialogued, although uniquely divine, but to me, are withheld, as it tied me to this, the ideas contained, are amiss to all others, which is why I so reluctantly appear to rigor these facts, which, is so strange, that I hide them near, conflated in my thoughts, as they build up in arrears, but to only this, can I dare to absorb, as they suddenly, convolutedly, and impetuously begin to appear. But in order for us to grasp the principles underscored, and to understanding to all of these meanings, for there is to embrace, and to meditate much gleaming, which lies ahead of us, to be challenged, manifested, surrounded. And I stand by it to solicit, promising to embark, from this detritus, to match that true readiness, to implicitly define, because it is the true wisdom that is confined, but also purposefully hidden within, as we pray not what we beg for, but challenged as it does not relinquish objectively, to confound you, nor I, and to thrust past unaffected by the profaned vain worldly desires, that defeat most men entangled by briars of haste, and certain obvious bad taste, and if by dazzling consumptions distract all the many behind it unfecundant, but to this is be read, and understood, with careful contextual connection, conceited which as patterns to pry, onto with us as crystal clear, and riddled with the most advanced of complexities, only to remedy a sense of mean necessity, and that is therefore monumentally divine, injected with richness, and with beautification of deepness defined, comparative to what simplistically came before this part of the story, and that is surely beyond all of this, is hands down, is where all the glory is consequentially provided. Because this is more imposing, but not that impossible, because confidence will subside, to any fear submitted, and thus this gate is inevitable to be enigmatically arranged, only to become an obscure, and decider turning mundane, and this was all what it was, end of story. We complexly learned that repetition of this in kind is trite in reality, but only played like this esoteric, comprehensive, and imposing, but only defectively to patterns, to such simplicity definitely innates it. To the rest of this text is cryptic as to contain it, as we continue, move forward, convicted and confident with our bold venture, and to that which is well storied. And to this, the overwhelming truth is imploding, because we gain from experience a deep, natural insight, that capitulates timeless wisdom, and to the center of its unfolding, this is to all of what yields forth from it, and therefore, we will try to understand the true sense of it all, and is that fortifications are reticulated and is by design, to either build us up strongly, and to ordinarily align, these yet are simultaneously construed as to a light source that led to a dimly lit path, of a paradoxical paradigm, and also by this, it could also be homogeneously malignant for others, so, based on what they seek, it shudders, as if it just was what it intended to be, to break them down to the weakness of their knees. This is very strange indeed, to imagine one's comfort in the retreating recessiveness of depression, suffering through the deepest and this darkness of oppression, someday maybe to be rescued, is the very same kind of blinding aperture to justice that came from its refuge, but this is also inclusive for whom, is to be suited in, usually, and purposefully exclusive to, in order for identifying all this. This is a very common reaction that occurs all among us, and happens to speak to all who are opposed, and ferociously to those who this, happens to painfully deny it, but also to them, that's, confided, ardently to those, together conspired, as they sacrifice all things provided, to defend its virtue, above all things united. This is very true and factual, and is obviously recognizable, as sickly negating for those who reproach it, and also justified equally, as refreshing, and thus positively opposite, to those that approach it. This is peculiarly provident, depending simply on what it is contained inside, and also very evident. And much consistently is narrated, of perceptions, and to the inceptions for this, also to care, and do what we choose to bear, and the obedience of those, are unto abiding, and that is all included in there, for all us to cognately share. And to construct, but the best of values, and also, useful of propositions to which, we prepare. That kind of thought surely is rare, and is of utmost worthy of our attention, because it makes the best of constituents, and of concessions. But just know, that a willful opposition to practice these only breaks down, and reflects more about how we are, and what's in our hearts, and it does so ineffectively, to destroy all but, the intentional delusions, detestable oppressions, and to an existence, muted and deserted, of any useful opportunities. This is because, the offense that is triggered, is an unworthy choice to choose, for a case with, and for a practical form of defense, against the unintended consequence. So, whatever the choice we shall choose, is acutely important, and uttermost, unlimited by scope, to fully understand, for a contemporary to repeal, and relinquish the vain, empty embrace of everlasting appeal, to our best of senses, and to all of their unworthy, earthly possessions. This is also, to be freely given, or taken as such, equally, and, just as easily if forgiven, so try not to tread dangerously close, to an unbecoming and contested prohibition of this, consensually antiquated, or even worse, a seriously destitute, a bleak, or a bland race to reconciliation, which rides together, usually encroached by, an able-bodied perfunctory to its grips, and deprived of sensible objectivity, oppositional to that, to which simply derived, from a machination of gluttonous greed, committed to this obsolete obsession. Now look, my dear, did I make all of that clear? Let's not set the date, in order to change in due time, period. And if you didn't know, this and that is right here. Just hold on to your horses, and let's ride. What is needing of surveillance, being alerting to actions, what should be solicited to us, is that we cherish ourselves within first, and make it foremost owned. With the conspiring dualities that ineptly exists, we need always to be vigilant, and opposed to the travesties, well known, and bring us, forevermore closer to righteousness. We can sit here, and debate, or come to grips with the pain that overwhelms us, and to finally relieve ourselves of these useless contraptions. It is trust, that is gained through uniting the principles contained, until this becomes uselessly inane, and also becoming less contentiously complicated, unto dullness, and always inciting to vet, and to let divergent urgency commence, to consciously let depravity control the key elements, twisted to make explicit, with sprawling proponents, and be apprehensively enrolled, and all toward the perfunctory profane, modalities persisted, to proving, insisting to consider, looseness to intentions to romance impelled subsequent to compelling, rapidity to contorted, conspiring with alliances, machinated for defilement, connecting riddled, serendipitous severities, enhanced to attract foe, detriticus, hubris proximo contestable taboos that's existing, with persistently somatic obstructions. Erupted, all to make mnemonic propensities distracted, for the perceptually pneumatic, craftily and to lasciviously extricate, for conceptual contrivances, appealing to be indemnified, and unto corrected. All the details were contrived, yet mollified, make banalities raw indulgences, become promiscuously though particularly absurd, into banal peculiarities, that we let the suffrage inflections, let us down and chain us to that, and look toward the beauty of what is prodigiously, prominently, and apparently the usefulness to be an itinerary, to very spectacular degree. If we humbly advance, and let usefulness entrant to contain what we positively pronounce it, to what ultimately establish and retains, is when usefulness in our lives, eminently attains it. So let's slow down, and actually, really try to relate togetherness, and probably promote, and masticate, true brotherhood, and empathic, sisterly, compassions will concord, and move toward prudence, and embrace all, to which prove survivalistically reliable, to provide contextual, to concordances. This brings conspicuity, to make conflagrations, birth the purposes, also conjecture, converging completions, completely arisen, apparently relevant to the continuing capacity and capability to be contingent, to the revival, that surely effulgently, be eminently, severely focused in recording, to that which breeds to retaliate, to those others that completely can't accept us, and toward good constabilities, that contain us, to reliabilities, that refrain us, from ever so, to do ever so to complete us. Let's fucking stomp to beat down to all this. Do it now, because the future that is taking shape is proper and profusely reliable conjecture toward becoming the here and now, and sit patiently for the time, for that to retrain us, to be ever so near to the hereafter. Thank you again for giving me all of your invaluable time. Now that this time has taken its course, it will be given all back to you, prescient, and prescribed to each to this, and that, one, every individual. So, please don't dismay, and mistakenly convey, that you did not see it here, or all there? To each to his individually, and to time indivisibly, that's owned. And just like those Dems in the House, I will say the rest of what needs to be said of that, and then I'll bounce out, departing away from all of this, bullshit. Ahem. So, I will be reclaiming back my time. Thank goodness that this hindsight is gone, which would be 2020, it was a good lesson to learn, but although really, not definitely any fun. Sayonara sucka, oh, suffering succotash, don't let the door bust all yo ashes on the way out, we got out dis biatch, cause I'm gonna get you with ma, diak, you see? That's one of my favorite lines, hee hee. And, thank God for all of that, because we really did get lucky. So, may peace finally be increased in the Middle East, and with all of that, is my time to grind, and hopefully to be worthy to finally shine, in order to overcome all of this, because I'm tired, and I'm out. And may the pursuit for unity and peace always be present within us all, whether ethereal or terrestrial, and every exquisitely sublime individual. This was intimated by an impeturector of impetuous intimations. A self-proclaimed, ordinary individual, having an extraordinary experience. Copyright 2021. Final.